There we go. So my black job on tonight is to affirm a knowing that we are equipped to, as Emil and Uncle Jimmy said, meet the moment. I know, as a reflection of many moments that I have been able to bear witness to, you all are looking at images from MBJC's first inaugural equity ball produced at Howard Theater. We created a space where ballroom culture could be centered, where we could talk about our connection to democracy and voting, and where Uncle Bayard was in the space gleaming down as we did our damn thing. And so I need all of us to understand that we have what it takes to meet this moment of the maturation of our very young and very fragile democracy, this moment to strengthen the ties that bind those of us who have skin that's been kissed by the sun, or who know the enduring cost of the black tax. Whatever moment we may be met with, our ancestors who continue to conspire for our success and the superpowers that we have been granted by what Sambufu Some calls those of us being ancestors or gatekeepers, those things ensure that we can meet those moments. And in a room filled with Black Samjan-loving brothers, I know of nothing else that many of us honed our skills in the church. So in this moment, turn to your neighbor and take turns stating the following: we have what it takes to meet this moment. If y'all went to a black church, you know what's coming next. Do it again and say it like you mean it. Next slide. I appreciate y'all. My hope is that you move confidently in whatever way you are entering the arena, knowing that we are winning. I'm going to share a couple of black facts to underscore this point. This is data that was collected by the national organizations led by Black LGBTQIA+ leaders. You'll hear me use same gender loving in place of gay. And these are black facts to turn down the white noise and make sure we're having conversations informed by our community. Next, okay, so the first one is that the plurality of black people believe that our community can and should be doing more to protect and support Black LGBTQIA+ people and our policy issues. Our folks are with us. They understand shared fate and a couple of other things we'll get to. Next point. Black people are highly movable, especially when exposed to messages that connect data to personal responsibility and collective action. One of the most dynamic, next one, data points that we collected is that 50% of Black LGBTQ youth have seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, and 16% of those youth attempted it. This is the kind of data that allows people who start by saying, I don't really think I'm an active accomplice, it's fine, they can live their life, to understanding the importance of doing more. Next slide. Now, as we think about these facts, you gotta keep going till we get to the next one. I want us to understand that while we are winning, we cannot get to freedom alone. Again, while we are winning, we cannot get to freedom alone. So let's honor the lessons of Fannie Lou Hamer, who taught us that none of us are free unless and until all of us are free. 82% of black people have some proximity to gay, lesbian, bisexual, or queer people. Count the letters with me. 42% of black people have some proximity to trans or gender expansive people. You hear me use gender expansive in the place of non-binary or non-conforming because those things affirm the very binary we're trying to get away from. This is also the same average as Americans generally without respect for race. The last point should piss everybody off though. 40% of black people have a family member who identifies as trans. There's an edit on the slide, I just noticed that now, but that should be trans. So while they moved the velvet rope to allow us to bring our gay black asses into the club, they're saying that we can't come in with the rest of our siblings. This is again why I say that we should remember that we cannot get to freedom alone. Next slide. Yesterday, I want everyone to note that on October 17th, the US Department of Justice achieved the first guilty verdict prosecuting a hate crime against a transgender person under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Act. The first. But what most of you in this room know, or probably all of us in this room know, is that Dime Doe, who was one of our sisters who had her life stolen, is not the first nor will be the last trans person to have their life stolen. Dime's life is a reflection of the fact that too many of us face violence that often goes ignored and uninvestigated and without justice. My prayer is that we, while we meet the moment, find ways to address these enduring problems together. And as we do so, let's meet this moment by believing that we are enough. Just as we are. without apologizing or explaining that we are beautifully and wonderfully made just as we are. Be your beautiful Black, sartorially sophisticated, Hattori hands-on mind sharp selves in loving community. Let's use our powers for good, brothers, not against one another. And I'll offer the words of my brother Chris Emden, who recently joined me on my Teach the Babies podcast. He said the following: the best way to convict somebody and to really touch their humanity is to show up. You ain't gotta say nothing to them. You ain't gotta instruct them. You ain't gotta do anything. When your full self is on display, two things happen. Either A, they get convicted and wanna know more, or B, they get burnt and go away. Either way, we win. My hope is that that nourishes you as soul food as it did me. The last thing I wanna leave you with is this. Notice that not once have I said any of this is easy. We know it's not, and however, we are winning. In closing, I offer you the slingshot metaphor, which was provided to me by a beloved leader within our community, Nadine Smith. This is a brilliant mind who labeled what they tried to say was a parent's Bill of Rights in Florida. She was like, no, that shit is the Don't Say Gay Act. Nadine also talks about us living in this slingshot moment where it feels like we're being pulled back, that we are regressing from fights that have already been won, from law that should have already been settled. And it feels shitty, especially for those of us who are in the arena. That's the technical term. That's what the doctorate says, shitty. But what she says is that much like a slingshot, by either force or sheer inertia, we will be released. And when we are released, we will be further from where we started in this moment with these white supremacists who are doing all they can to signal to us that we are winning. My prayer is that you all know that, in spite of the messages that we receive every day, and that you take advantage of opportunities like this to turn down the white noise and be affirmed with the things that you already know deep in your soul. Know that we are winning, and we will do so in community and in love. Let's meet this moment and any moment that might challenge us. Thank y'all. I don't know who's next.
Please welcome to the stage Richard Brookshire, co-founder, Black Veterans Project.
Hello. This is such a full circle moment for me, and I'm going to just speak from the heart for a little bit. I met Emil the year that he founded Native Son, and it came into my life at a very opportune time. I had just graduated from graduate school, and I found myself exiting the military after serving 7 years as a combat medic, and I was lost. And Emil and Native Son saw me, and they encouraged me, and they nurtured me. And to be here today to speak to you 6 years later about the work of Black Veterans Project is deeply humbling. And so what is Black Veterans Project? I think it starts with the fact that about 6 years ago, I had a really difficult transition out of the military that had ended, unfortunately, in a suicide attempt. And it was when I survived that suicide attempt that I read a book called When Affirmative Action Was White. And it was that book that really planted a seed for me. The book looks at social welfare policies at the advent of World War II, or shortly following World War II, and looked specifically at the GI Bill and the ways in which Black vets had been locked out of the GI Bill, and the ways in which that also began to exacerbate economic inequality in the country in a way that was unprecedented. And so for the last several years, Black Veterans Project built out a partnership with Yale Law School. And we wanted to begin to piece together the intergenerational struggle that is access to veterans benefits. And when we talk about access to veterans benefits, we talk about not only Black vets who serve, but military families. And I am very sure that there is a number of folks in this room who have folks who've served and who probably are deeply familiar with the plight that is equitable access to not only care, but also benefits that give you pathways to the middle class, the ability to get a VA home loan, the ability to get access to educational benefits, of which I've used over $500,000 in GI Bill benefits to attain an education, to be able to position myself to do this kind of work. And so with that partnership with Yale Law School, we did the largest race-based data query in the history of the Department of Veteran Affairs and laid the foundation for a landmark case called Monk versus United States, which I'm proud that about 3 or 4 months ago became one of the first reparative justice cases to survive a motion to dismiss in American history as it moves toward class action. And it's a landmark case because Conley Monk, who, and I would love to tell his story very briefly, Conley Monk was a veteran of the Vietnam War. He volunteered to go to Vietnam. He was the son of a World War II veteran who also volunteered to go to World War II. And when his father came back, he didn't get access to the GI Bill, wasn't able to buy a home using VA home loans for his family, wasn't able to use VA education benefits to go off to college like so many of his white brethren were. Right? And then so Conley finds himself at 18 or 19 volunteering to go to Vietnam at the height of the conflict. He serves 2 tours in Vietnam. And in Vietnam, he gets into an altercation with a white superior who calls him a racial epithet, and he finds himself on the other side of a dishonorable discharge. And dishonorable discharge means he doesn't get access to his benefits. And so for over 40 years, Conley Monk fought to try to gain access to those benefits. And because of the work that we did with Yale more recently, he's been able to file a case called Monk v. United States, where he's suing not only on his behalf, but on behalf of his deceased father for compensation that he should and his family should have been receiving for generations. And this case is so important also because it will be the determinant as to whether Black vets can sue in the future for historical racial discrimination by the Department of Veteran Affairs. When we talk about economic inequality in this country, I think it's imperative to understand the ways in which that intersects with not only the Department of Defense, but also the scourge that has been tens of billions of dollars siphoned out of the Black community through benefit obstruction. And so the work of the Black Veterans Project has been to try to build a public narrative around this issue and to force some kind of reckoning. And as this country transforms itself over the course of the last few years with the burgeoning of conversations like what's happening in Evanston with local, or what's happening in California with respect to reparations commissions, this is a very important time when restorative justice is on the ticket. Right? And we have a responsibility not only to ourselves and to the future that we are trying to build, but to the forebears who came before us to ensure that reparative justice isn't just a flippant conversation. It is core. Reparative justice is core to the conversation around racial equity, and that is what Black Veterans Project is here to see through. And so I'm really proud that over the course of the last year, we've now built new partnerships with Harvard Law School and have a new partnership burgeoning with Harvard Kennedy School, and we will be advancing this agenda as we think about other cases that we'll begin to test in the courts, but also think about legislative repair. So I'm deeply humbled that Emil has invited me here to tell you a little bit about this work and serve as a very brief intermission to a lot of amazing panels that you are about to hear. And I can't overstate the value that Native Son has played in my life by constantly seeing me even when I didn't see myself. And so thank you for listening. And if you aren't aware of Black Veterans Project, Google us, follow the work. And there are many, 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 many faces, including Garen here, who've helped to elevate our work over the course of the last few years. And I'm indebted to the community here. So thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage our moderator, Darwin Thompson from Gilead, panelists Tori Harris, Tennessee House of Representatives, Vinton Jones, Texas House of Representatives, Shervon Jones, Florida State Senator, and Zachary Parker, D.C. City Council. Please welcome them.
Hello, hello. What's up, y'all? It's Friday, and we got y'all at a panel on HIV prevention. Give it up for yourselves. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Darwin Thompson, Senior Director of Public Affairs at Gilead Sciences. I get the pleasure of leading our corporate giving in the United States. And so I just want to take a second to have the panelists introduce themselves. We can start with you, Tori.
Hey everyone, I am State Representative Tori Harris. I reside in Memphis, Tennessee. Big Memphis, not the little one. I have been serving in the House since 2020. I am the first and only currently openly LGBT elected official in the state of Tennessee, statewide. And so I sit on Children and Families. I get an opportunity to serve as the House Minority Floor Leader for the state of Tennessee. Children and Families, agriculture, transportation, those are things that I am very, very passionate about, and the work that we do around that. I came from the background of nonprofit work, HIV work as well, and so look forward to this panel, and I'm sure we'll get into some good conversation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is State Representative Vinton Jones, and I was elected in actually this current legislative session in 2023 as actually one of the first Black gay men elected to the Texas House in history, as well as one of the only openly Black HIV positive people serving in a state house in this country. I was during this legislative session on the Public Health Committee as well as the Corrections Committee, and one of the most proudest things about serving in this position is that I represent a district that I was born and raised in, that my grandmother is my constituent. So it's pretty cool.
Okay, come on.
Hey everybody, I am Zachary Parker. I represent Ward 5 on the DC Council, and with my election, or currently, I am the only openly gay member of the council, the first openly gay member in the last 5+ years, and some would argue the first openly Black gay council member to serve. That is not to erase those that may have come before me that did not publicly affirm their position, but I think and I believe that we as Black gay men in particular, but everybody in the community just needs to take up more space. So I'm really excited to be here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chevron Jones, and I have the pleasure of representing the 34th District in the state of Florida. I am the first openly LGBTQ person elected to the Florida Senate in Florida's history. And I'm appreciative to be in this space, not only because to be amongst these amazing brothers who sit here, and many of you who I have done work with over the years, but I'm happy to be in this space because this is the exact conversation that we need to be having, knowing that, you know, if Sister Kamala wins the presidency in just a few weeks, to continue how we continue these conversations, and they do not stop because they're not going to stop, so we shouldn't stop either. So I'm happy to be here today.
Perfect. Let's give it up for our panelists. So this is going to be rapid fire because we got less time in the discussion, guys. So I'm going to rapid fire these questions to you guys. So we're going to start with you, Tori, since you're to my left. So last year, the state of Tennessee rejected HIV prevention funding that was intended to support those most impacted by HIV. Now we're seeing cluster outbreaks in several cities. From your perspective, what lessons can we learn from this, and how can this affect other states?
Yeah, so Tennessee ended up declining almost $9 million in HIV funding last year. Our governor made that decision as to, we're on this path of trying to make it to where states have more control over how they manage the dollars rather than having to be under. If anybody who has ever worked in a nonprofit, you know your ultimate goal in nonprofit is to where you are not stuck under a federal or somebody's guidelines of how you spend your dollars. And that is kind of where our state is wanting to move towards. We are not the first state to try to do this. We're the first state to try to take away funding in a long time. I think the last time a state tried to do that was between 2015 and 2017. Florida tried to take $70 million. I believe they were successful. But we tried to do $9 million last year. What that ended up doing, ultimately, there was a subsection of the funding that was being rerouted to the health and prevention and treatment of those individuals who live in the trans lifestyle. And so the benefit for them was to try to take that funding away from them. And so instead of taking the subsection of $10,000 that was routed to individuals who may be trans, it would take away the whole $9 million, okay? And that way they can reallocate those funds to who they wish for those dollars to actually go to. Ultimately, we did a lot of fighting. There was a lot of battle, but back and forth, behind the scene meetings, events that we had to participate in and try to figure out how we're going to be able to save access to treatment and prevention and so many other things when it comes to HIV funding in our state. And we ended up having to work with CDC. Very grateful for the work that CDC is doing because they were able to allocate those dollars and reroute half of the $9 million through another organization in the state of Tennessee to be able to fund those nonprofit organizations that are doing the work. So we were able to save some of it. There's a lot of ways that we are there's a downfall. And then going back to how does this affect other states, Tennessee touches more states than any other state in this entire country. We have 8 states that we touch. So just imagine the crossover and funding and the people that travel between Tennessee to go to other states. We are affected by that. And ultimately, we've got to figure out how do we end up making these organizations survive without having to rely on those states. And just imagine had we not had a President Joe Biden or Vice President Kamala Harris in office at this very moment, if we would have been able to get those funds from the CDC. And so we're grateful in those areas, but we have lost a lot. And so we're trying to figure out ways to continue to make that movement.
Thank you, and you were really big in advocating for those funds, so we appreciate you. Vincent, I'm just gonna go down the line. You ready? Okay, perfect. A couple years ago, a Texas judge ruled that employers don't have to cover HIV prevention medications. What potential implications can this ruling have on meeting our EHE goals? And for those who don't know what EHE stands for, it's ending the HIV epidemic.
Well, I think that when it comes to the goals of ending the HIV epidemic, first and foremost, we have to make sure that our laws are in place that are not criminalizing or stigmatizing our solutions that we're working towards addressing HIV. I think most importantly, when it comes from a medical standpoint, not interrupting care. And so when this decision was made by this judge to not cover PrEP, I mean, it's significant because really between Florida and Texas, we go back and forth between some of the most craziest bills that hurt people of color, that hurt LGBTQ people, and hurt ultimately the response to ending the HIV epidemic. So this is just one more of those examples that we see, particularly in the South, of legislation that truly interrupts the advances that we've seen in the HIV movement to end this epidemic. And hopefully, as we kind of tune into these, more clinical outcomes, we're looking at legislation and policy and the decisions that are being made, and understand how important it is to be able to get out and vote and have our voices heard, because these people that we put in these positions make these critical decisions that can help or hinder our progress towards ending HIV.
Perfect, succinct, I love it. Councilman Parker, so DC has seen a significant reduction in new HIV infections, probably one of the greatest in the country, right? And so can you tell us what's working well and what specific policies other states and cities can adopt to see the same reductions?
Yeah, there are several things I would name. First, we identified it as a problem. I think while that may seem trivial, that's significant, and we'll hear that from other states. We also set a goal in the mid-2000 teens that our 90-90-90-50 goal, which is now 95-95-95-50 goal, that we would track and devote resources to driving down infection rates in the district. 2, we stood up a department within the DC Health, or the Department of Health, that would focus solely on HIV infection rates and other STDs, that reports annually and that tracks by individual and communities infection rates and seeks to provide resources and support. And significantly, we started deepening our investment in organizations that have long been doing this work, rooted in communities, those like HIPS and Us Helping Us, that reflect the communities that are seeing higher trends of infection rates, and that often have more trust with communities. So it's not so much legislation, but it's about building the systems, the capacity, and trust with communities that are often on the front lines of the issue.
Perfect, I love that. The good senator from Florida. Florida has several laws that criminalize HIV and doesn't follow the science. Your office has been a strong advocate for HIV prevention and awareness in Florida. What more can be done to ensure no one else is criminalized?
Well, first of all, we need to shift the conversation because HIV is a public health issue. It's not a criminal issue. And the state of Florida, let's be honest, when these laws and these policies were created, they are absolutely built on homophobia. And even the fact of how we cannot even move significant legislation when it comes to HIV or any type of LGBTQ policies or any type of black pro-black policies is because of the makeup of the legislature that we have. When Vinton, as he was just speaking, and when you look at the stigma that's behind it, and you look at the policies that's been created behind it, the question now becomes, how do we change that conversation to ensure that even Republicans on the other side of the aisle, which there are some in Florida and some of the other states, that when you put the shit in their household, so when they know that it's just not about the LGBTQ community, but you too have someone, whether directly or indirectly, that is the reason why you should hop on board, this is how we begin to change the conversation about it, to where the policy is no longer baked in fear, but it's baked in science, it's based in statistics, it's based in what we know is real and true. And so Florida, and as we did make a little bit of movement last year, which I'm happy about. And I had to get my bill, and I had to do it with the Republican, which I was cool with. Listen, I don't need to get the credit as long as we get the shit done, right? And that's what we were able to do. Now, the question is, can we go a step further? And so what we have done is building coalitions to learn more, like what we're doing here in these spaces, going to more places and working with other individuals like Vinton, like Dr. Johns and others, to make sure that when we were putting these policies on the table, what does it look like, not just to be all inclusive, but to make sure that they don't even see that this is Democrat or Republican issue, but this is a humanitarian issue that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We appreciate your work. So enough with the individual questions. I'm going to ask a question for all of you guys now. So we're in this room on a Friday, and a number of community leaders are here. How do we help inspire other key leaders and individuals outside of the HIV community? Because oftentimes we talk to ourselves in a silo. Like outside the HIV community, like those in this room, to be engaged in advocacy to really help in the HIV epidemic for everyone everywhere. I'll toss it to anyone. Vincent, your gears are churning.
I think that we have to not expect someone to come save us. Right. I think that we always look at other movements, whether it be reproductive justice, whether it be the Black community, the LGBTQ community, to come save us. And so if we're really like about that life, we have to get into the positions and really positions of power to demand that attention and to refocus that attention on us, because even within the broader LGBTQ movement, or sometimes even within the Black movement, I don't think that Black gay men are getting the attention that we need when it comes to really addressing our issues. And even so much so when it comes to the political environment, it's becoming even worse. Even in some spaces, it's almost kind of taboo to say Black gay men. And so what we have to realize that nobody is coming to save us. And so if you are about that life and you're thinking about this elected official coming to save us, consider being that elected official. If you are concerned about a person not in a position to serve us, become that person, because that person is not coming. No matter how bad we want them to, they're not. And so we have to own the power that we have in these spaces to make sure that we are demanding that conversation, not only amongst us, but in other movements, and making sure that we are not left behind as they would if they came into our spaces and demanded that same respect.
I would just say, I think it's important for us to build connections across movements. And so in DC, although we have seen a downward trend in infection rates, recently we've seen an uptick in infection rates around those using needles or using drugs by way of needles. And the drug-free DC movement, which would not normally advocate on behalf of the LGBTQ community, there's obviously a connection there. And so more recently, we're seeing these two separate movements come together around a shared push to make sure people are more safe. So I think building connections across movements is really key, having a shared language, a shared humanity. The second thing I would say, I think it's important for us to dig deeper in the data and personalize the data. It's one thing to say X percentage of people in a city or a neighborhood or community is experiencing X. It's another thing to start putting names to it and sharing the stories and the narratives and letting them share their own stories to just personalize the movement and giving those people the power. I think that is really key, that if our community could see that you too could get elected and or pass legislation and or advocate while still being on the forefront of this movement, I think there's more power to be held there. So.
Yeah, I think we have to be more intentional in how we are building our coalitions with each other and ensure that we're not competing against one another. Because I truly believe that together, if all of us who have an idea, we would come together and figure out what does this look like to collectively create this change that we all want. We're not worrying about who gets the credit for, and making sure that we digress our egos when it comes to these spaces, and knowing that, listen, a victory for one is a victory for all of us, right? And we have to be intentional about that. But then it also requires us that when we sit at these spaces, and I'm more particularly talking about sometimes when we're the only black and white spaces, to make sure that we're bringing us into those spaces. And we're not just joining into the choir and the conversations of which they're having, especially in white gay spaces, and us being very intentional to make sure that they are allowing us to show up in these spaces and to make sure that we're inviting others into these spaces. That's why I thank God for Native Son, and I thank God for you, Darwin, and others, because if we're not having these conversations just with each other, this is great and this is a blessing, but we have to make sure when we're going out that we're bringing the same energy into those spaces. It might make them feel uncomfortable, but I'm uncomfortable because you don't have enough of us there.
And I will add that, and part of doing that, we've got to learn, not to be funny, but we've got to learn how to use them the way they've used us in a lot of the spaces that we enter into. One of those is that, you know, with the HIV situation that we took place of in Tennessee, it hits home for them when it comes to human trafficking. And so utilizing human trafficking in the ways that HIV could be effective helped us in a lot of ways in making sure that we were able to pull some dollars down for HIV. So we've got to figure out ways to utilize them to the best of the benefit that we possibly can. And working more together, there's a lot of people in here that I don't understand why they haven't ran for office yet. We've got to take up some of these seats. Ultimately, you can have a few of us here, but we've got to take up some of these seats. I was at an actual I flew in yesterday and I went to an open mic night situation. And I think the owner of that was there and he sung. He has a following. He needs to be running for office. Why are these people not out here like running for office? Where are they? We've got to start pushing these people and supporting and getting behind them to actually do this work. So we've got folks in here that we need to make sure that we are supporting as a whole, because there's more of us than just the ones that you see sitting right here.
That's right. We got time for a couple questions from the audience. I don't know if there are any mic runners. This light is real bright, so I can't really see. But if we got any questions from the audience? This like Zoom, all right. Okay. Well, so if each of you could leave the audience with a final thought around how we end HIV or how we get engaged into policy or into an elected office, what would it be? We'll start with you, Senator Jones.
No problem. First of all, thank you, Darwin, for doing this again. Listen, the one thing I'll tell you all is shit too bad for us to be sitting on the sidelines. And it's not going to get any better. And Vinton made it clear that there is no one who come to save us. But the respect that I have for us in this room is the fact that we're here on a Friday having this type of conversation. The question is, how does this choir go out as good as we sound, that we go out having the same conversation with individuals who are outside of this space? And my ask is that we continue to do that. We continue to do it after November 5th, as we go into 2026 and into 2028, that we continue to keep this same type of energy and momentum that we have. And I'm hoping that there is one day that we will get to a place to where not all of us are collectively doing the work, but we actually get to that victory that we all are looking for. I love you all, and thank you for having us today.
Yeah, I would just say there's power in what is said, and there's also power in what is not said. And too often, as has been expressed up here, what is not being told are the stories of folk that look like us and communities that reflect us. And so I would just encourage everybody to use your platform, use your voice, take up space everywhere you go. I just would reiterate that because, as was mentioned, it's not just about those sitting up here or those that have spoken already in the program. Each of us have a way to ensure we can all be free.
I would say that the biggest lesson that I've learned and that I always impart is something that I learned right here in Washington, D.C. when I lived here. And that, where you at, David? David still here? There you go. It was a lesson I learned from the National Black Justice Coalition when I worked there, and that's to own your power. When I came to Washington, D.C., I tried to keep myself small to make other people comfortable. And DC taught me to break out of that shit. And so as we think about the importance of this moment, as the importance of now, it is so important that we break out of our own mental prisons and we really understand the potential that we have to make change, especially when we look at this from a political standpoint. So often we look at the national races and we think about these millions and millions of votes and how unimportant our quote unquote one vote is. But when we look at races at different levels, whether it be presidential, whether it be statewide, or even in our local races, how important our voices are to this conversation. And so if there's ever a moment to be able to show up right now, I encourage you, if you know that position, and if there's something on you to be able to do, to see something different in the community that you live in, do it, embrace it, and understand how important it is for you to be involved in that very moment. And in this moment of politics right now, if you do have the opportunity to get involved, it doesn't have to be a state representative. Hell, if you become a precinct chair, just go spend time at the park, do that, because it is important. And the rights that we have seen in our adult lifetime right now are really in jeopardy, and all of our voices are needed at this very moment. So just get involved and be a part of the solution.
Knowing that being Black is enough, that being able to be involved in pulling people together in your own groups, in your own segments is more than enough towards this work. What we can't do is fall into the divisiveness of separating our own internal groups. We are one body of people, and trying to figure out how do we better communicate what may not directly impact us individually, but how do we make sure that we're saying, hey, it's impacting somebody that looks like me, and actually being available to support that individual, even though you may not necessarily understand what they're going through per se. I also think back to like the groups that we're involved in, and I know y'all watched the other day that moment where Vice President Harris had with Whoopi Goldberg on The View, and they just looked at each other. And a second ago, I had to just look down here because I'm sitting next to all these young men, but we're all a part of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated together, and I did not realize that we're all a part of something. Yeah, except for this one, but we're all a part of something on this panel, and it means that we have some space somewhere else that we need to be taking up. So going back to kind of what he said, make sure you're taking up in the spaces that you are a part of. Be involved, get connected. We have an election going on right now, but it doesn't stop there. And HIV is a topic that we all have to continue to fight for moving forward, even after tonight, after we leave this room, after November, into 2025 and beyond. So everyone continue the fight wherever you are.
Thank you. I am not an Alpha, I'm a Sigma. Thank you. But seriously, on behalf of Gilead Sciences, we want to first say we are privileged to sponsor Native Son, sponsor this event. We believe that it will take a more than medicine approach to end the HIV epidemic, but I do believe together with everyone in this room, we can end the HIV epidemic for everyone, everywhere. So let's give it up for our panelists, and thank you.
Please give it up for our panelists one more time. And if we could have all of you step to the step and repeat for a photo. Thank you. To the step and repeat. Thank you. Please welcome to the stage Brandon Burke and Sean Michaels, the owners of Thrust. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. I am Brandon Burke.
Hello everyone, I'm Sean Michaels. We both are co-owners
of Thirst Lounge, not Thrust. I know that R and that U get mixed up sometimes because it's not a traditional spelling of the word. We do use the U instead of an I for thirst. We started our journey together. We're actually been friends for about 20 years now. Actually, 20 years this last month.
last month.
So we started our journey together as business partners doing an open mic event, which was just recently talked about.
Called Thursday Bliss.
Yes, it's called Thursday Bliss.
I think I'm the person that was singing that should be a councilman now. So.
And we started that in 2010. Sean actually came to me. I have a degree in marketing from Hampton University. I know it's Howard's weekend, but Hampton University is where I went.
And
shout out to Emil.
Wait a minute. I have a music degree from Morgan State University, both HBCUs.
Yes,
though,
absolutely. And Sean actually started that event and came to me and wanted me to help him with marketing, and that's where we really grew our friendship, but also grew our partnership in business. And what happened was we were going around to different locations because we would outgrow a space and we needed another space, and we were trying to find different venues to host our event. And what we realized was that we needed a space of our own. Our community that really supported us were Black gay men, and the LGBTQ community in general, but specifically Black gay men is where it started. And we were like, we need to tap into that in order to have a space that is for us. And then we were like, well, it can't just be open mic every night, right? I mean, nobody's gonna go to that every single night that you're open. And I have two friends of mine, Charles Hughes and Richard Solomon, who own Lambda Lounge and Club Lambda in New York. And they were really kind of the inspiration for us to say, you know what, we can do this in our own, and we can do this in DC.
Well, and so similar to what the gentleman was saying earlier, we were actually, before we made the decision to do it, we would be going out to different clubs and locations and saying to each other, we need a space for just ourselves. Like, why don't we have a space for where we can be? And wondering when someone else was going to start it and when someone else was going to do it. And I think that conversation might have started 2 years, before we actually made the decision to do it, because we saw that nobody was really making that move to do it. We didn't feel equipped to do it because he's in marketing, me in music. Neither one of us were in the nightlife scene, but it was what was in our hands, which was Thursday Bliss, that helped us to bring forth Thirst Lounge.
Right, and so, once we developed our business plan and decided this is what we wanted to do, we were like, well, how do we get it done? And the biggest issue that we were running into was funding, right? Money, and the fact that, you have a business, but it's not open yet, and you don't have funding, and the bank doesn't want to give it to you, and where do you go get that? And it was a lot of using personal funds and angel investors and people that we had around us in order to
family members
to get the money that we needed to get started. And we found two other business partners to help us with the vision that we had.
And we want to make sure we say their names.
Yes.
So Doa and also Mo, they are two business partners that we have that helped us to start Thirst Lounge. Actually, when we were doing Thursday Bliss, the second club that we actually ended up doing it at, Mo was the manager for that particular space. And he always was very supportive of what we did. He loved even when people didn't come and he didn't make a lot of money, he still loved the energy of what we brought to his space. And when we said that we wanted to do this new venture, Mo said, I've wanted to do a gay club, like basically the whole time he's been in the industry. And he is an ally of the community, but also sees the potential and the need for spaces like what we have to offer.
And the biggest challenge that we are having right now is dealing with neighbors and sound and issues like that, and we're working with the neighborhood to get us to a place where we are seen as community allies and people that are here to develop the neighborhood and not just be a nuisance because we're Black gay men who have a space. And that has been the thing that we have been really trying to overcome recently. But we look forward to everyone's support. We're thankful for where we are and what we have done. And we're just looking forward to moving forward.
Yes, and we're grateful for a lot of people in this room who have come to Thirst and party with us, but also are, pillars in their community. And those of you who have reached out to us to ask, how can you help? What can you do to help us? We really appreciate that because it's needed. And I think that the space also offers, while we are a party space, you can come to turn up, of course, but also we are a networking space. And me not being part of the nightlife community at first, I was all about the turn up and the drinking, but now I'm starting to recognize and realize how important these spaces that are dedicated to us are to advance our community, because conversations that happen in the space are not just about, what the music that is playing or the drinks that you're having, but they're also real life conversations. We're there to be able to provide a space for people to come together for happy hours, or if, you have a business that you want to do something, and we have a lot of people who reach out to us and ask us to host different events there that are for the community. We really appreciate you doing that, and we ask you to continue to utilize our space to help advance your causes.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If we can have you over at the step and repeat for a photo. We'd like to welcome our next panel. Our moderator is Robin Gavin, Pulitzer Prize-winning critic for The Washington Post. Panelists are Garan Keith Gaynor, White House correspondent and managing editor, Politics and the Griot. Richard Fowler, commentator, Fox News, and Eugene Scott, host for Axelos Live. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you for letting me pick your brains about the election and the coverage of the election. I thought I would start out by addressing what I've been calling the elephant in the room, not a Republican elephant, but the elephant. And that is, in the last election, there were a lot of hashtags saying, "Thank Black women," for essentially handing the election to the Democrats. So my question is, this time, are Black men going to hand the election to the Republicans? Feel free to tackle that.
My name's Eugene. I'm a host at Axios Live, and I was previously at the Washington Post with Robin, and I wrote about identity politics, so I studied this quite a bit. I think an important thing to know about this conversation is that there is no demographic. The only demographic that supports the Democratic Party more than Black men is Black women. Black men overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. We've seen polling suggest that Donald Trump is making inroads with Black men and Latino men as well. But the likelihood that most Black men will vote against Kamala Harris is just not supported by the current data or history. I think it's really important, especially when you look at these swing states. When you think about Wisconsin, when you think about Michigan, Arizona, if Kamala Harris wins those states, it won't be because of Black men. It'll be because of white men and white women. The reality is there are not enough Black men in these places to have that big of an impact. I do know, though, that there is an effort and a desire to turn out more Black men for the Democratic Party, because there is some concern that Kamala Harris is not doing as well with Black men as Joe Biden, but she's not doing as well with any group of men as Joe Biden, except for Black queer men. Black queer men are leading in their support of Kamala Harris. So that's what'll happen, but I could be completely wrong. I was wrong about 2016, but this is what the data says right now.
Well, Garen, you've been following Kamala Harris for a really long time. Back when people were sort of saying, where's Kamala Harris? And I mean, we talked a little bit about how her messaging has changed, how she's become a different kind of campaigner. And how has she spoken to the different demographics and specifically to Black men?
Yeah, so I would say there's definitely been a gradual progression for the vice president. I think that what she does really well is that she self-corrects. She probably watches her interviews, she sees what the media is saying about her. We know that in her office there's been a lot of turnaround, and I think the shift was around the leaked Supreme Court ruling in the Dobbs case. She obviously is a woman. She was very passionate about that issue. We all know when she speaks about that issue, she is very electrifying when talking about that issue. But I also saw moments where throughout the past 2 years where she just got better and better. I think about when she traveled to Tennessee when the 2 Justins were expelled, and she gave this really powerful speech. I don't even think she had a teleprompter. And then she went on her tours. I was with her on the college tour, went with her to my alma mater, Morehouse College. And I was surprised at how much the young people on the campus really loved her. And so it's ironic that now we're having this conversation a year later or so about young Black men seemingly not wanting to support her. I talked about this on CNN this morning. I was up at 3 a.m., so I'm very tired. And I will say that she has been engaging with Black men throughout her career. You think about when she was a district attorney in San Francisco, she started the Back on Track. And that was specifically to get Black and brown young men to re-enter society after they left the mass incarceration system, knowing that she wanted to make the system a little bit more fairer. As vice president, she convened nearly 50 Black men, business owners, and I was there covering that, and I talked to some of them. And these were young Black men who had no idea that there were SBA loans that were available to them, that there were billions of dollars that were available to them to apply for. And had she not convened them and told them, they might not have ever known that. And so what I've been saying is that she does tailor her message based on who she's talking to, but she has been trying to talk to everybody. But as it relates to young Black men, I think that there's a mis and disinformation issue going on with the internet. Young people tend to get, millennials, Gen Z tend to get their information from social media, which is to the detriment of people like us on this stage, because people are not reading and watching the news like they used to. And we're always trying to break through to tell them the complete, accurate story of not just Kamala Harris, but of Donald Trump. And we're not trying to tell you who to vote for, but it is very alarming how much a lie and a conspiracy can spread so quickly and so vastly.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I mean, it does seem like there is this kind of push and pull between what some Black men have said that they want to hear in the messaging, and that being something specific for them, and then other Black men saying, wait a minute, don't put me into this, special category. I'm concerned about, all the big issues. Just speak to me as a voter. So, I mean, Richard, when you are, talking to people out there and getting a sense of the polls and all of that, I mean, how do you interpret the way that people Black men in particular want to be spoken to? What kind of messaging would appeal to them?
Well, I think it's a both and approach, and thanks for having me. But to echo what Eugene said, the first thing to acknowledge is that African American men are one of the top voting demographics for the Democratic Party, and for that, the Democratic Party owes them a debt of gratitude. Instead of sort of saying, are they going to jump ship, are they not going to jump ship? It's a thank you for voting for us every time in every election, waiting in lines, dealing with some of the arduous rules in some southern states that you have to deal with to do that. So I think that's thing one. I think thing two, it has to be a both and approach. I don't think any voter goes to the poll and say, I'm just voting on this one issue. They go to the polls with a grocery cart of issues that they vote on. And I think that's the misconception oftentimes, that when you're watching those of us who do cable news talk about just immigration, and this is gonna turn the election, that sensationalism and that hype doesn't actually match up with how voters go to the voting box. They
So
go to
it's
the
not the economy, stupid?
No, it's a little bit more than that, right? I mean, if you're a woman, you're going with the economy, you're going with reproductive health, you're going with, if you have an LGBTQ child, you're taking that with you. You're taking your whole self into the ballot box with you. And so I thought what we saw the vice president do this week in rolling out a plan specifically for African American men that include business owners, that include folks that want to get high-paying jobs, that include folks that want to take care of their family, and that includes, I think, specifically, it seems like a benign issue in this election because all the issues are broad. But when I look at some of this polling and we're having this conversation around the economy and the price of groceries, I really see the argument as people are looking for a really good job. Right? I need a good job that I don't have to have a college degree, yet I could punch a clock, I could work 9 to 5, I have enough to afford rent, I have enough to take my partner out for a nice dinner on our anniversary, I have enough to possibly enroll my kid in soccer or art or violin or whatever they want to do, and I'm looking for the candidate between the two that can get that for me. And I think when you hear the vice president have this conversation about how she wants to move the economy forward, that I think seems to jive more with where a lot of black men are, which is why I think you saw her today run a marathon of rallies in Michigan where she knows she has to have this conversation with folks who a decade ago or 2 decades ago, their dad or their grandfather or their uncle lost their job in a factory that was closed down.
Well, I'm curious, as you guys are covering the campaign, I mean, it does, how do you balance, sort of on the one hand, a candidate who seems to be campaigning based on their own rules, and another candidate who is campaigning based on the rules that have always existed? I mean, and I'm not talking about the sort of, both sidism kind of thing, but simply the way in which sort of success or progress, or just how you balance that judging the candidates and how well they're doing.
For me, I find it important to really highlight Trump's rallies because I work for the Griot. It's a Black-owned, Black-operated, Black news site, and it frustrates me that mainstream networks have moved away from showing his rallies, including Fox, because they know that it's look for yourself. And I often will do stories just on certain sound bites he says, because I'm like, my audience needs to see that. Especially some of these, whatever quarter of black men under 50, according to an NAACP survey, who want to vote for him. I mean, just the other day, he was like, black and if you're a black and Hispanic, you don't vote for me, and get your head checked. And there's been, so many other things like the enemy within. That they're more of a threat to the U.S. than China and Russia. We're talking about dictators who get people killed who speak against them. Right. And so for me, it's been about, I think covering the vice president is pretty traditional because she's a traditional candidate, but Donald Trump is not traditional, and the media doesn't treat him like a traditional candidate. And I think we need to continue to shine that light because it's pretty alarming, the things that he says.
I think that's right. And I think it's also important to remember that whether you like him or not, he's just an odd figure in American history. Most presidents, after they run a term, they sort of get on Marine One and they take off and you don't see them again. They disappear. They vanish. We haven't seen George W. I think he's painting. George W. Bush is like painting in his backyard somewhere in Texas, and we don't see him no more. Like when Barack Obama gave his first interview after he left office, I think that was 2017, maybe 2018. We're like, oh, he's alive. Look at him. It's Michelle. They have a book. This is great. That's what made them so exciting. I think for the past 4 years, even though we live under the Biden administration, what the American people have suffered under is a split screen of 4 years of Trump. It was January 6th, then it was the January 6th committee, then it was the Trump trials and the Trump rallies. He's been running for president for almost 800 days. We've never seen a presidential campaign that long. And then with that being said, we've never seen a presidential campaign this short, right? And so you're watching the two juxtaposition happen. And I think for voters in this moment, and I think that's why it's really hard to look at this polling and say, this is how the voters feel. If we in the media are feeling whiplash for what we're dealing with, right?
How do the voters feel consuming all this information coming at them so quickly? Just a month ago, there was an attempted assassination attempt. Then there was another one. Then there was a vice presidential turn to president. There's a lot happening in the space.
And
I think
yet
a lot
the
of voters have tuned out.
polling doesn't seem to move.
No, it's very baked in. I mean, people are familiar with Donald Trump and they know how they feel. You know, lots of people are learning who Kamala Harris is, and I know that's surprising to those of us who've been paying attention for 4 years, and even when she was in the Senate. But the reality is the average American is just not consuming news every day, especially news beyond their local news. To your question about balance, I mean, the harsh reality is that political journalism is an art, not a science, right? And I think a lot of times we are still learning to how to do this. You know, you asked about Donald Trump. I think what he revealed is that Washington and this country as a whole, for the most part, is actually not run by rules, but norms. And he just breaks these norms and people don't know what to do. And there are efforts that have been made to course correct. Some of them have been successful, some less so. Before the Washington Post, I was at CNN. My first day at CNN was the day that Donald Trump announced that he was running for president. And so CNN, as you remember, used to play every single speech from the beginning to end. The thought behind that, in part, was one, it was good for ratings. Two, the thought was that if people hear him, they will know that this is absurd, or perhaps that this is not what they want. And I think that we realized that that's not the reality. Lots of people heard him and were very attracted to it. And so the pendulum swing from that is not to show it all, which is what Garen was saying. And that may have been, that may be a mistake, because anyone who pays attention to his rallies right now, they've just gotten so much worse in terms of what he says. And the Harris campaign has really tried to, you know, do clips and go viral with showing people what he's saying. But that doesn't necessarily have the same reach or impact as cable news and media covering it, showing it like they did in 2016 and 2020.
I mean, the question, you know, about black men and the Democratic Party has come up. On the other side, there is the question of whether or not the Republican focus on transgender rights and queer rights and pushing back against that is going to be a winning strategy for them. And I'm wondering, like, what does it feel like, you know, on the ground as you talk to people, as you talk to, you know, people who are involved in the campaign? Does that seem like it's a strategy that is working for them?
Well, as David Johns pointed out, in our community, there is support for LGBTQ rights. However, the internet is a vicious world, and I look at comments, and even if I post a clip, you know, they will assume that I am, you know, a pro Kamala Harris, or they'll say like things like, just today actually, someone said, every time I see someone telling someone to vote for Kamala Harris, which I was not, they are either gay or they sound like they're gay. You know, so we know that homophobia exists, is out there, but I'm not sure that as it relates to our community, that's really catching fire. But I always, in my reporting, try to connect the dots between the communities that are under assault by legislation. Not saying any particular party, you can connect the dots, but look at abortion rights, look at LGBTQ equality, trying to reverse that. Look at the overturning of affirmative action and attacks on DEI. I mean, we are having legal cases where anti-white discrimination cases are winning. Mm-hmm. And it's the same movement behind all of those movements. And I think it's unfortunate that there are some heterosexual black men who seem to be fooled by the messaging of the right, and they're not seeing that an attack on black LGBTQ, on black women, is an attack on them too. And it's our job to help connect that dot and tell those stories.
I mean, I'll copy and paste everything that Garen said, because I think he said it right. But I would also add to that, I think it's also important to realize that just because the money is there and the boogeyman is there doesn't mean it's actually necessarily moving the people. Okay. And I think that's really important to recognize and understand. I think when you look at a state, like take the state of Florida, I think Ron DeSantis would have a tough time in this environment running for re-election because a lot of people in Florida have a bad taste in their mouth about some of the decisions that he made, including the Don't Say Gay bill, where a partner can't put their picture up on their desk, or banning books, banning a James Baldwin book, and all those things are connected, right? I think when you're going after the most vulnerable, it's connected. I think what you see recently, there's ads that have been put up, sort of, I think the tagline is, Donald Trump is for you and Kamala Harris is for they, them, is the ad that they're currently running. And part of that ad is this, it's also the same type of fear mongering that they're trying to move. And the group they're trying to penetrate, what you're seeing happening behind those ads is Donald Trump and the Trump campaign are very, very, I think, openly trying to solidify their base, to let their base know, that don't be fooled by anything else. This is why you got to vote for, because this is the boogeyman and this is who you got to be afraid of. I think when you dig into the polling, I don't think it's having the effect that we think it's having, because to the point that Dr. Johns raised in his slides, for people of color, these people live in their family, right? We're members of families, right? We're members of communities, and because of that, people are like, but wait a minute, I know that person. So when you're attacking them, you're attacking somebody that I know and somebody that I care about, and I have love for them very deeply. And so I know I don't agree with you, and I don't agree with your policies. And oftentimes, once again, even though I live in the cable news environment, and I've been there for way too long, I do think in cable, we sensationalize these things because that's how we get advertisers.
Does anyone have any questions out there? I'm just looking if any hand. I see a hand. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Before I ask my question, thank you so much, Michael Mullins Whitaker. I'm the owner of the Week Collective. Before I ask my question, I just want to say thank you so much to Brandon and Sean at Thirst Lounge. We didn't get a chance to ask them questions, but I want to give them a comment. I want to say thank you, because beyond having a bar, they have created spaces for us to talk about the election, to talk about why it's important for our community to be out. So music, karaoke, great. But thank you so much, guys, for creating something that we can get in and get involved. It's so important. Thank you. Give them a round of applause. My question is this. When we talk about Kamala and we talk about the race, oftentimes something that really bothers me is that we get into a space where Black men sometimes want to ask extra questions when we already know how Donald Trump does his thing. We then got to ask, is she Black? What has she done? Why we have to ask so many questions surrounding her, knowing the track record of Donald Trump versus this Black woman who is doing all the things that we want to happen, but we're so quick to say no, or we're so quick to need an extra question. So my question tonight is, why do you think that rhetoric is so present in our community for Black men to want to have to ask the third question, the fourth question about this Black woman, when we see a white man who is present in his racism time and time again?
So was Obama right?
Yeah. So I do think President Obama is partly right. Like, the reality is sexism is an issue in what is keeping many Black men from supporting the vice president. But that's an issue with white men and Asian American men and Latino men. We know that sexism is a real issue. It's not the only issue. One reason some people ask questions is because they're not engaged. They're not keeping up with what she has been doing. One of the reasons they haven't been keeping up is because I think the mainstream media in general has done a poor job of covering her vice presidency. If people generally don't know what the vice president's job is. And people think she's just been sitting in the office for 4 years, and she hasn't. She's been on tour. The reason she speaks so well is because she's been giving speeches every week all over this country, speaking to so many different people about very different issues. There is a real media literacy issue. Another issue, respectfully, is I heard someone on CNN, Maria Cardona, refer to us as the United States of amnesia. The number of people who don't seem to remember the Trump presidency it shocks me. But like you say Muslim bans and you say babies being snatched out of their mother's arms at the border, like people don't remember that. People telling Colin Kaepernick, get your ass off the field. Like people seem to have lost that. And some of that's valid. People have a lot going on in their lives. A lot of our lives have changed significantly in 4 years. But sometimes people just seem like they don't remember what he has done because they literally do not. And I don't know what to do about that.
And they remember a Trump check, even though Biden gave them a check too, just saying.
Biden check, and the Biden check was bigger. That was the thing.
And there was no Trump check. The Democrats had to approve that. And it got delayed because Trump wanted to put his name on it like he puts his name on everything. I mean, trying to tell facts in a disinformation era is like pulling your hair out. Yeah.
Well, I would love to continue on.
I just want to add to what he said because I think it's important,
Yes.
and Emil will forgive me hopefully. But I think you raised such a valid point, and you said something earlier, Eugene, that I think it's really important that we sort of a conversation that we have as a society. Right after Trump left the White House, we sort of went about this idea of like we're going to cancel him and make him smaller. And while we were making him smaller, he was engaging in the same behavior. And so nobody got a chance to really see it. So he was off Twitter, he was off Facebook, he created his own little Truth Social thing. He's a big fan of mine, and for the past week, he's been tweeting about me, which is cool, I guess. But either way, I think in doing that and making him so small, to Eugene's point, we do have this sense of amnesia, right? So we don't remember how crazy the Trump rally was, and people were punching each other in the face, and he was saying, punch him in the face and I'll pay the legal bills, which is still happening at Trump rallies.
Oh, yeah.
But nobody's covering them because news directors have made the decision to say, oh, well, we're gonna ignore him because they're lies, but I think it's important for the voters to see it so they can be like, that's what I
But
didn't
there
like.
was the concern that the nonstop coverage elevated him in a way that was completely outsized. And so there was this retreat in the other direction.
True, but nonstop coverage is what got us Joe Biden in a way. It got people to say like, yeah, we want the other guy.
Yeah. So my last question, because we are out of time, I'm afraid, is are you feeling optimistic about the future of democracy?
So the short answer, I'll say yes, because right now I'm a fellow at the Harvard Institute of Politics, so I'm with young people all the time, and they are very encouraging and they're very inspiring. I will say that I'm encouraged by the popular vote. The thing is, we know that we don't choose our leaders by the popular vote, but there are a lot of people who get up every day in this country and try to make this world better in so many ways, and not with these big fancy jobs, but just loving their neighbors. And I see that. And I do believe those numbers do outweigh those who believe that the enemy comes from within. And I've seen that in red states and in places that you think, wouldn't be the case. And whether or not that will overpower what we're seeing coming, from some of our worst voices and proponents, time will tell.
I would say I'm optimistic, especially I'm optimistic about young people and the young movement. I had a conversation with Justin Pearson, and he's in red Tennessee, and a lot is up against them, and he's just so optimistic about the future because they really care passionately about climate change and gun rights and abortion rights and LGBTQ rights. And I'm also inspired by the record first day early voting that we've been seeing in states like Georgia. We had record registration before early voting started. And so that gives me hope that that the electorate is more savvy than people let them to be.
I wake up, I feel different every day. I think today I'm optimistic. And I think it's because, listen, a majority of the world's democracies are voting this year. And what we've seen in the ones that have already voted, if they are sort of any indicators of where America is going to go, is they pick the side of the working man and the working woman and working people. We saw that happen in the United Kingdom. We saw that happen in France. And I think, while I think this race is going to be very close and it's going to take us a number of days to count these votes, so on election night, be patient. We probably won't call it until Saturday or Sunday. But I do think it's going to be close. But I'm feeling optimistic today. I'll let you know tomorrow how I feel.
Thank you all so much. Thanks for having me.
Please give it up for our panelists. If you can step over to the step and repeat.
We're on slide.
Yep.
Nobody worry about jumping the shot right now. Once they get clear, we're going to
Please welcome to the stage Tyleek McMillan, Youth Coalition's Director, Democratic Party.
You know, I've heard an elder say once, some of us have been in the house so long that we have forgotten what the storm feels like. So we've been in the house so long that we have forgotten what the storm feels like. And I know that we got our nice cars and we got our nice houses and, you know, we pop tags and throw it in the bag. But some of us have forgotten what the storm feels like. But I know there's also some people in the room tonight who understand what it took for us to be where we are. The grit and the determination, the struggle, the resilience of getting knocked down, but getting back up again, the hopes and prayers of praying grandmothers and mothers who got you through. I would even take it a step further for those who understand that it's only that we stand on the shoulders of sheroes and heroes and unsung angels that we're able to exist and convene in spaces such as so sacred as this, to be surrounded by Black excellence, sons and daughters of a movement of struggle, of joy, of beauty. We stand here because somebody had to work for it. And in the honoring of that sacredness of what it took to get here, I'm here to remind you that we still have work to do, because that sacredness reminds us it's that damn important. When I was a kid, I was a dreamer. I used to dream of the possibilities of where life could take me, where it could take my family, where it could take my community, but most of all, where it could take humanity. I dreamed of possibilities even if it was hard to see in my reality, and these dreams continually repeated in my mind. I dreamed of what life would be like if I was that kid who wasn't afraid of judgment and walked in my proudness at a young age, in my beautiful colorfulness, or what life would be like. Would my life be different? Would I be here today? I dreamed of what it would be like if my father wasn't incarcerated, if he was home with me and my brother. I dreamed of what it was like if my mother didn't battle from cancer or struggle financially, if that business got up off the ground, if we were able to financially buy a home, would my life be different? And in that same breath, we stand at a crossroad of who we want to be, as I say, 18 days and a wake up, if we don't stand to be angelic troublemakers, that this sacredness of our existence, of us being here to fight for the freedom and that new way forward. As the Vice President says, the freedom to make decisions about our own bodies, the freedom to love who you love openly with pride, the freedom to breathe clean air and drink and to drink clean water, the freedom to feel safe in our communities from violence and police violence included, the freedom to vote, and the freedom to be who we are in this space. See, elections are no longer just about policy debates. They are decided by who votes, and just importantly, as who does not vote. And as Youth Coalition Director at the Democratic National Committee and now the Pennsylvania Campus Engagement Director, it's my job to spread this sentiment and message to young folks all across the country to help them understand that our power is just that important to fight for these freedoms. You know, this election, there's 41 million eligible Gen Z and millennial voters, and over 8.3 of those are 18 and 19 years old. So we have to prioritize how we center young voters in this campaign, and how we translate to young folks and how we translate their message to be inclusive of this new way forward. And to be honest, it's been hard work, but it's been necessary work. And I have the joy and honor to be in community and in conversations with these young folks all the time, and how we show up and build that trust. And as I started off, when I first stepped into my position, I started off a Young and Powerful series. I called it Our Future, Our Voice, Our Vote. It was a program that was geared towards educating and peer-to-peer relational organizing. I had a big understanding that it's just a lot of young folks out here who don't even understand how our political process works, who don't even understand the branches of government. But we work with our partners to conduct youth polling, whether it's through Voters of Tomorrow, to see how they felt about the Vice President and Governor Walz and their economic agenda. And we found overwhelmingly that the jobs, economy, and the costs were overwhelmingly top issues for young voters. And they trust the Vice President and Governor Walz more than they trust Trump and Vance. And we also rolled out a 5-figure digital ad campaign that targeted Black and young voters across 6 battleground states. And earlier this month, we launched an HBCU and HSI campus voter registration campaign with I Will Vote. And as you may have heard, we are in the process of our HBCU tour, which is happening right now at Howard University, North Carolina A&T, and Clark Atlanta. Then we'll be visiting Spell House next week. And as the Vice President, is a proud Howard alum and understands the role that our HBCUs play. And that's why the Biden-Harris administration has invested $17 billion, would it be, into HBCUs nationwide. We even partnered with BET for activations across key states. We've been in the streets. But alone, we cannot do this work. It's up to all of us to do something. We have 18 days and a wake up to not let the couch win. It's not glamorous. It's not always going to be easy. But I want to remind you that it's vital. Every door that you knock on, every phone call that you make, every text that you send to your friends brings us closer to winning. And when we win, we deliver for policies that protect the environment, that protect healthcare, that fight for racial and economic justice, that help fight to protect the democracy that we all are standing in. Your legacy, I say, is on the ballot. This is a movement to craft what the history books would say about you. I always say all the time, we're not just only in this fight for ourselves, but we're fighting for generations yet unborn. And when we look back at this moment, what will history books say about you? Did you stand up? Did you fight, or did you stay in the house and sit on the couch? And so, as I said before in my opening, as the elder said, let's not forget what the storm feels like and what it took for us to get here, to be here, to convene in here, and it's important that we all do the work. So I say to you, let's get to work, because as Madam VP says, when we fight, we win. You gotta say it with me, when we fight, That's right, thank you.
Thank you. Please give it up for Tyleek McMillan. I'd like to welcome our last panelist. Please welcome Alfonso David, civil rights lawyer and president and CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum, and Rashad Robinson, civil rights leader and president of Color of Change.
How you doing? Good evening. You've heard from community leaders. You've heard from members of state and local houses. You've heard from members of the media. And now tonight, Rashad and I are going to close us out talking about how we build collective power, how we conduct narrative framing, and what the future looks like. As you heard, my name is Alfonso David. I am the president and the CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum, which is an international enterprise that focuses on economic opportunity for marginalized communities, including members of the Black diaspora. We do that work through events, through leadership development, litigation, legislation, and policy. Some of you may have heard that we recently successfully represented the Fearless Fund, which is a company out in Georgia that was sued recently for providing grants to women of color. The argument was, by providing grants to women of color, they violated federal law. And we successfully represented them in court, and that case recently resulted in a settlement. And tonight I'm really happy and privileged to share this stage with a friend of mine, Rashad Robinson. I'll have him introduce himself.
Rashad Robinson, president of Color of Change. Color of Change is a racial justice organization driven by millions of members, Black folks, and allies of every race. And what we do is we run campaigns that force corporations and government to do things that they don't want to do. And we hold them accountable in ways that can sometimes make them uncomfortable. We were founded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, when Black folks were literally on their roofs begging for the government to do something and left to die. And the thing about moments like that is they oftentimes illustrate the things that we already knew. In the case of Katrina, it was geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of what has been done to our planet. But at the heart of it, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. And so whether it is cutting off the money from white nationalist groups, whether it is getting Bill O'Reilly or Glenn Beck fired from Fox by cutting off their advertiser money, whether it is holding right-wing policy shops accountable by cutting off their money, it's a lot of cutting off money, or whether it is the work to mobilize millions of Black voters by working with volunteers to reach irregular voters, what we're trying to do every day is to build power and build the type of power that changes rules.
So I'll take a point of personal privilege at this point just to give Rashad his flowers. Many of you may know or may not know that Rashad has decided to transition after 13 years of being at Color of Change. 13 years is a long time. And he has made a decision to transition from Color of Change. He's going to write a book, which we are...
I'm going to finish a book.
Finish a book.
Yeah.
Which we're expecting in the new year, and he's going to continue to do social justice work. But I want to say thank you on behalf of so many people that you've worked on behalf of, the community that you have supported for such a long time, and you will continue to support. Many people sort of don't appreciate how difficult it is to do civil rights work. It is hard work. Every single day you have to pick yourself up and continue to fight the battle when you see oppressive policy after oppressive policy, regression after regression. And I just want to thank you for doing this work and doing it so well for so long and continuing to commit to do this work moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. And you all will see me soon with, I have a book coming out with Penguin Random House, the One World imprint on power, narrative, and culture, and how do we level up so that we can win more things. And looking forward to both finishing the final run of that, but also right now, what I'm most focusing on is running through the tape on this election cycle. And in January 1st, sort of taking some time and finishing those projects. But let's jump into the running through the tape, and where we're at and what we need to do. Yeah.
So our individual power is important, obviously. We have to show up at the polls, we have to vote. But how do we build community? How do we build collective power? And that's something that we want to spend a few minutes talking about, because again, we have to register to vote. In some states, you still can. In many states, that date is expired. But after you register to vote and you actually go and cast your votes, how do we build collective power?
Yeah. So, one thing that I oftentimes talk about, and one thing that animates the work, is really understanding power, right? We throw around power, we say build power, we talk about power a lot. Power is the ability to change the rules, whether it's the written rules of policy or the unwritten rules of culture. And far too often we mistake our presence or our visibility for power. We mistake presence for power. Visibility, awareness, retweets, shout outs from the stage, that's not a bad thing. But when we mistake presence for power, we can sometimes think that something has been done that hasn't actually been done. We can think that a Black president means that we're post-racial. We can think that the internet stopping because a Black celebrity releases a new album means that America loves Black people as much as America loves Black culture, and America can love, celebrate, and monetize Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And those two things don't actually have to be in conflict. And so when we think about presence versus power, it's incredibly important that we think then, what are the pieces that help us change the rules? And that means that we have to have infrastructure. We have to have organizations. We have to have vehicles that can help us channel our power. And then we have to have the frameworks that actually allow us to channel those who would do us harm. To actually, going back to the Katrina moment, when our community is demanding something, decision makers actually have to be nervous about disappointing us. And if they are not nervous about disappointing us, then nothing else matters. And in some ways, that's what this election comes down to, right? Let's not talk about whether or not we like the candidate or dislike a candidate. We are electing a person who will be on the other side of the table that we have to negotiate with. A person will be on the other side of the table that we have to push. A person on the other side of the table that will be a partner. For me, with my politics, there is no one that will align with everything I care about that can be president of this United States. It's simply like that person could not win the Electoral College. So I have to go in and think about who is going to be the best possible person on the other side of the table that will negotiate, that will hear us, that will listen, that will need our vote the next time around and will care enough. And that, from a strategic point of view, is part of the conversations that we need to have and how we have to think about this upcoming election. And you've been doing so much of that work and so much of that conversations through your work with Paint the Polls Black.
Yes, so people who may not know, we have a series called Paint the Polls Black. We are a sister company of Essence. And I thought earlier this year how important it was for us to bring the issues to people. And it will surprise you some of the questions we got when we did Paint the Polls. I recently got married. Not me, but this is a question. I'm still single. This person said...
He's still single, guys.
I'm still single.
Okay.
This person said, I recently got married and I changed my last name. Can I still vote? Or do I need to change my voter registration? I was convicted of a crime 5 years ago. Can I still vote? These are questions that we're getting from people because they don't have the information, and in many cases, they're operating with disinformation. And so we thought it was important to do Paint the Polls Black to make sure we empower our communities, not to only go out and vote, but to spread the message about what the rules are, to make sure what they know, that they know about the rules and they also know about disinformation. Because when you look online, sometimes it's really difficult to understand and decipher what is true and what is not true. So we're going through that process to make sure that people understand. But I want to go back for a minute to what you talked about, which is collective power. And as Black, gay, and queer men, many of us go through, not all of us, but many of us go through challenging times when we come out with families and loved ones. And when we think about building community, when we think about collective power, often we disassociate ourselves to our families. We often don't talk to our families about politics. We often don't talk to our families about the political issues that directly affect our lives. Yep. So as we think about collective power, that is also an important tool and a strand that we have to pull through. Because otherwise, we won't be able to bring our community with us. And we end up talking about these issues in a silo. So when we talk about economic opportunity, it should apply to us in the same way that it applies to members of our family. When we talk about healthcare, it should apply to our family in the same way that it applies to us. When we isolate the issues and say they only apply to us as Black, gay, and queer men, we indirectly isolate those in our community that we need to create collective power. And so when we think about some of the tools that we may be helpful for people to think through, what are some that you think may be helpful at this point?
You know, when I think about the sort of tools of engagement, right, I say, and we're talking about collective power, I say join and engage in an organization. I see Dr. Johns here, and I say, you know, everyone in this room should be a member of MBJC and should be supporting that organization and its infrastructure and helping to build its ability to reach more people. Everyone should be a member of a local organization or a national organization. And this election cycle, I urge you to join the work of Color of Change PAC and volunteer and help us reach voters. But part of what helps us move from analysis to action, from talk to actually doing something, is being part of something bigger than ourselves. Because we can spin our wheels over and over again. We can doom scroll on social media. But getting involved in moving our feet, I think is incredibly important. And that kind of moves us to this conversation around narrative and around sort of what we say and how we say it. The first thing I do want to say, just to start off, is that narrative is the is basically from a definition perspective, and the definition I use is narrative is what people believe regardless of whether it's true or not. And narrative does not have to actually be true. Right? People have all sorts of beliefs about gravity, for instance, and that will dictate how close people will get to the edge of things. And gravity is real, but a lot of stories that people have about Black people and Black queer people are not actually real. But it still dictates how close people will get to us, and how close sometimes we will get to ourselves and people in our own communities. And so the story about this election, one of the major media stories that should be the story about Donald Trump, is why Donald Trump is white America's leader. What does it say about white people and the white community that they have chosen this leader that is a accused rapist, sex offender, that has a failed businessman time and time again, led an insurrection against the United States government, that white people, whatever's happening in their families and whatever's happening in their communities, have decided that Donald Trump is their leader. But instead, we're having conversations about a percentage of Black men that may or may not vote for Donald Trump, and that somehow Black men will be the deciding factor about whether or not Donald Trump will become president. And that's a trick bag that we actually can't allow happen. Because the thing about, once again, narratives, it doesn't actually have to be true or not in order for people to stick. And so now we're having all of these conversations in the media about whether or not the group of people who are Black men, who are, after Black women, most likely to vote for a Democratic candidate. In fact, Black men, and these are just the facts, Black men vote with the women of their race more than any other group of men. Black men vote for pro-abortion, pro-LGBT, pro-civil rights candidates more than any other group of people after Black women. They vote for pro-abortion, pro-LGBT candidates more than white women. That's just a fact. That's not like a hope. It's not a dream. And so lots of times we get ourselves stuck in conversations. We also, from a narrative perspective, tell stories of inequality that are oftentimes unfortunate rather than unjust. And what do I mean by unfortunate rather than unjust? We tell stories that make inequality and injustice seem like it's a car accident. Like it just sort of happened and it's not being manufactured and there are not people profiting on the other side. And what I mean by that is we will say Black people are less likely to get a loan from the bank instead of saying banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. And that may sound like semantics, but when you say Black people are less likely to get a loan from the bank, people start asking what's wrong with Black people and let's fix Black people. Maybe let's give them some more financial literacy so that they can do better with institutions which have targeted, redlined, exploited, and excluded them from the very beginning. If you say banks are less likely to give loans to Black people, then you start saying what's wrong with the banks? Let's fix the banks. Far too often we talk about Black gay men and Black communities as vulnerable. We're not vulnerable. Vulnerability is a personal trait. Now, some of y'all might be vulnerable if you go on social media and see an ex that's too happy with their life. And that's vulnerability, and that's why we have therapy. But you know who you are. But vulnerability, but when you talk about Black people, Black queer people as vulnerable, people try to fix us rather than fixing the systemic issues that stand in our way. And when they do that, then they spend their time on charitable solutions to structural problems. They spend their time trying to do direct service to us rather than changing the infrastructure that is harming us, changing the profit incentives that are harming us, changing all the ways in which people are profiting off of our pain, and thereby committed to continuing those efforts time and time again. And so we should not lean into that and call ourselves vulnerable. We should not lean into the passive voice on the system and the active voice on the people, but actually put the active voice on the actual people that are harming, on the systems, and put the passive voice on the people so we can actually solve the problem. Because what if we started each conversation not talking about what we need to fix about Black people, but actually telling a true story about how Black people are the protagonists in the American story of democracy? That is narrative, because what is a protagonist if it is not the person or the people in a story that have fought against all sorts of odds, that have stood in the gap and has succeeded time and time again and have made things possible that it was otherwise possible. And so we first have to start telling an affirmative story of ourselves, and then challenge those and challenge the systems that will profit off of the story of us, that would put us in harm's way and continue to profit off of our pain.
Emil, I think we had talked about this before. The collection plate can start in the back because we just heard a sermon, and a fantastic one. I have very little to add to that, except to say I had the privilege of teaching law school for 10 years. And every single semester I would walk in and I would ask my students to go around the room and describe themselves. And what was fascinating to me, it was based on what was happening culturally, the zeitgeist. There were moments where people will say, I'm lesbian, I'm a woman, I live in Brooklyn. And then other years it would flip. And the first thing they would say is, I'm a woman. And how we self-identify and how we prioritize our identities sort of define how the community responds to us. And I would also ask them, and I think this is sort of dovetails on what you were saying, how we pose the question will dictate the answer. How we frame the question will dictate the answer. What do I mean by that? 2 US Supreme Court cases that relate directly to our lives. Bowers versus Hardwick. The Supreme Court had a case in the 1980s. 2 men having sex in the privacy of their home were arrested in the state of Georgia and prosecuted for what was called same-sex sodomy. And the question that was posed to the US Supreme Court was whether there is a constitutional right to engage in same-sex sodomy. That's the question. The court said, no, there is no constitutional right to engage in same-sex sodomy. Fast forward almost 20 years later. Same set of facts. 2 men having sex in the privacy of their home, this time in Texas. Case goes up to the US Supreme Court. The question is no longer whether there is a constitutional right to engage in same-sex sodomy. The question now is whether 2 consenting adults can have sex in the intimacy of their home, in the privacy of their home. Different answer. The answer is no longer no. The answer is now yes. And it highlights 2 important points. How we frame the question dictates the answer, and how we frame the question, if it's more inclusive of the community, will dictate an answer that will protect all of us. Right? If the question is framed in a way that is so narrow that it only applies to us, in most cases based on our history, we lose. If the question is framed broadly to apply to those who may not identify as Black, gay, or queer, we have to win. And that's how we need to think about narrative shifting. That's how we need to think about the data that is used to question whether or not Black men will vote for Kamala Harris. One of the first things we should be asking is, what is the data? How many people did you survey? And whether or not we're listening to the same question every 4 years, because we are. Every 4 years, it's the same question. Are Black men going to vote for the Democratic candidate? We have to probe what the basis of that question is, and we also have to probe what the data is that's actually undergirding the conclusions that they're reaching. And so with that, I want to shift to our final point, which is on the future. Let's imagine, because we have to, a scenario where Donald Trump wins the election. What does the future look like?
Well, the first thing that we have to understand is that the next president will get 2 to 3 Supreme Court justices. 2 to 3 Supreme Court justices. And so Donald Trump's election will mean that every single sort of set of rights that we hold dear, that has been won and fought for over the last 60 years, will be on the chopping block. Because Donald Trump's election will likely mean that there will be a Republican Senate. There probably will be a Republican Senate regardless, but there will likely be a Republican Senate. It's hard to imagine him winning the Electoral College and not having a Republican Senate, which means he won't just have to have really tough fights around these justices, but he will get to put some 30-year-olds on the court that will be there making decisions about our lives, because of, healthcare advances for a long time. And that will be the first thing that I think will be very clear. And there's been a lot written and a lot talked about Project 2025, and I'm not going to go into all the details about Project 2025 and the policy solutions. I'm going to stay at the meta level about Project 2025. And the meta level about Project 2025 is that it, in essence, really does shift the tools that we have used time and time again as Black people, as queer folks, as people at the intersection of a whole bunch of identities and experiences. The tools, the very levers we have used to actually fight for a better tomorrow will be taken away. Because if you criminalize protest and you criminalize the sort of activities that we have used to fight back, and you criminalize in ways, then you take that away. Right? You don't actually have to get rid of the Civil Rights Act if you ban the tracking of race data in all of the departments. Because in essence, you actually then won't actually know whether or not something is a problem if you're not tracking it. And then all of a sudden it doesn't mean, and then if you defund the civil rights offices, then you actually can't do any enforcement. And so it will mute sort of all the ways in all the things that we rely on that we don't even see. The things that we take for granted, the rules of law that have not been designed for us to win, have sometimes simply existed so we could survive. Those things will go away. And I just don't think we are ready for it. We like our things. We have gotten comfortable with a certain type of life, and we are not ready for the other side. We just simply aren't. And so, in so many ways, I believe in the resilience, in the power of our community. I believe in our ability to play jazz and to do all the things necessary to shift. And I sometimes hear people talk about the past and the struggle and saying, well, people had to make a way. A lot of people died. A lot of people didn't make it. A lot of people were hurt and damaged really bad. There is no time as a Black gay man that I want to go back to. Maybe sometimes for music and clothes, but other than music and clothes, there's no time that I want to go back to. And so I do think that when we think about day one of a Donald Trump presidency, we have to sort of recognize that all the things that we're holding dear about this country will not necessarily be real because we will have lost. And that loss will fundamentally mean that the people who have won will be ready and able to do a whole set of things to us and on us in ways that we will have to fight back in ways and in new ways that we haven't imagined.
And for folks that may be asking, why are we even entertaining the possibility of a Donald Trump administration? I think it's important that we take nothing for granted. We've seen this movie before. We cannot take anything for granted, and we have to win in large margins, because this is not just simply about casting your ballot. This is also about whether or not our votes are going to be counted in certain states. This is about certification in states across the country, because after you vote, your vote is counted, and then it has to be certified by the state in the first week of December before it is then certified by the House of Representatives. So there is a long process to getting to a president who will embrace our democracy. And if we don't understand and appreciate the threat to our democracy and to our lives, we may unfortunately be faced with someone who will take away our freedom.
But why don't you talk about what happens on the other side?
Joy. I think for me, Kamala Harris represents, and I've known her for a long time, so you could say I'm biased, but I try to be objective. And given everything that she has done and promises to do, I think for me at its core, she represents courage and he represents fear. And the reason why I focus on courage versus fear is because she will have to make difficult decisions in that role, and I may not like all of those decisions, but at least I know she has a moral compass. And the decisions that she will be making, she will make those decisions in a way that will cause us the least amount of harm. And as you said before, I'm not sure there is one person that I agree with who I would endorse on every single issue. And I think that's a false narrative, and I think that's a false paradigm for us. We have to understand that all of the rights, privileges that we have obtained over the past several decades, people died for us to be in these seats. And unless we appreciate that Vice President Kamala Harris recognizes that we have those rights, that disparities continue to exist, that we haven't achieved equity, and that we want to get to a point of liberation, then the other conversation is a non-starter. Because Donald Trump refuses to even acknowledge that we're facing racial disparities. And because he refuses to acknowledge that we face racial disparities, and because he continues to denigrate Black people, including Haitians, as of recent, we know what that roadmap looks like. And we already had a representative from the Harris administration talking about all of the things that they're doing. I don't need to repeat that. But I think for me, at its core, it's about courage versus fear. And when we think about our collective community, we need someone who will actually support our community and push for changes that we still need to make, both on the national and the state level.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying joy, because when I think of Black joy, it's not the absence of pain, but the presence of aspiration, not just what we are fighting against, but what we are fighting for. And taking this out of the presidency, I just want to make sure that as we think about what we do, how we think about this election, right? It's not just about what happens in the presidency as well. There are 2,400 elected district attorneys in this country. District attorneys are the most powerful actors in the criminal justice space. They determine whether or not a police officer is held accountable. They determine whether or not someone is prosecuted, what crimes are prosecuted. And over 85% of elected prosecutors in this country are white men. And so we have a lot of work to do, not just in terms of our work to shift, the work at the national office, but up and down the ticket, from school board races to district attorney races. But I will add one more thing outside of the electoral space. And I started off by talking about the difference between presence versus power. And power being the ability to change the rules. And changing the rules isn't just about our work around elections. It's about changing the unwritten rules around how things work inside of our corporations, how the decisions that are made in our communities. It is about a whole set of choices and decisions that are made every single day. And so a Kamala Harris victory will mean that a whole set of forces will align themselves to make her presidency unsuccessful. Because next year, the Trump tax cuts for the wealthiest billionaires will expire. And so corporations that come to us and say, buy our products, use our services, that want us in their pictures or want to sponsor pride parades, will be doing everything possible to make that presidency unsuccessful when it comes to renegotiating those tax cuts. They will be doing everything possible. Social media platforms that we use every single day. It's not simply just about the algorithms and the amplification, but it will be about sort of how these tools will be deployed to advance mis and disinformation on a wide range of things. It will be media platforms that across the spectrum that will be incentivized and have been incentivized to give Donald Trump already prime coverage, will be incentivized to make it harder for Kamala Harris's message, because if her message in any way, shape, and form holds corporations accountable, they're not going to be incentivized for that. And so I do think that part of the thing that we're going to have to consistently do is make sure the people who turn out to vote understand how hard it is to win anything. And, you know, one of the things, Alfonso, I sometimes hear a lot about is why didn't Kamala Harris do this? Why didn't Biden do that? And one of the failures of the narrative work of the Biden administration, and I've told them this, and I tell them this every time before every State of the Union, is you have to explain to people clearly why the George Floyd Act wasn't passed, why the John Lewis Act wasn't passed. And it just can't be about Republicans. It has to be about the enablers and the infrastructure that has supported those Republicans. It has to be a full story of the forces that are standing in the way. And if we don't actually understand that, then people will fill the story in about why change hasn't happened with immigrants, with a whole set of other people, because it's a much easier story to tell, to blame people than to actually blame money, resources, and infrastructure that is standing in the way of change. And so part of the work that happens if Kamala Harris wins is the work that actually has to happen by those of us who truly want to win more things and want to win bigger things, is that we have to not just take on the electoral space, but we have to take on the other spaces that are under contention and under consultation. And we have to take those spaces on, and we have to fight, and we have to win. And that means in our workplaces, holding accountable where the political spending goes and where the money goes. All of these places are going to be places where I think will be very important if we're going to make the demographic changes and that we see in this country not just be about presence, but actually turn into something that looks more like power.
Native son Emil Wolbekin, thank you for having us. We hope that this was useful, collective power, narrative shifting in the future. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad and Alfonso, and that is a pass the plate moment. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you all for showing up for Native Son, but thank you for showing up for yourselves, for our Black, gay, and queer community. This is a tipping point in our lives, right? And I think Talik said it best, legacy, our legacy is on the ballot. And so I want to thank you all for coming together as a community tonight on a Friday night, and y'all sat and listened and leaned in. Take all this information with you. This is what community looks like. This is how we galvanize each other, and this is how we create change. I want to thank all our speakers tonight. I want to thank our production and Yvonne McNair for the great work, and I want to thank our partners at Gilead as well as Wells Fargo. And then I just want to, because I teach as well, and I'm going to be real quick because the weekend is on the other side, and I'm clear about that. There is never a time in the future in which we will work out our salvation. The challenge is in the moment. The time is always now. And that is from our icon, James Baldwin. Thank you all for showing up. Vote, vote, vote. I love you. Be safe. And see you at Thirst for the after party. Thank you, everybody.
The bars will be open for about 15 minutes, and there's also desserts that will be served. So please stick around for desserts and a couple cocktails. Thank you.